And if we grasp these, it will revolutionize the way we view ourselves within the context of the law of God. The first thing is this. We see that the law of God is perfect. It's perfect. Look here in verse 17. Do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. In other words, when I talk about the law being perfect, as the psalmist says, the law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. Many people look at Jesus as though somehow the law was either broken, and by broken, I don't mean that somebody broke the law. I mean the law itself. It's either, it was broken. It's something that's broken, something that didn't work, or that the law was sort of plan A, and then Jesus comes and he's plan B. Jesus says, I didn't come to abolish the law. Those of you who think that somehow, that there were all of these different plans, and now all of a sudden here I am, so that no. There are people who think, well, first God tried with Adam, didn't work. Then God tried again after that with Noah, didn't work. Then he tried with the patriarchs, didn't work. Then he tried with Moses and the law, didn't work. Then he tried with David and the kings, didn't work. Now finally there's another plan that God has, and finally this one is going to work. As though somehow, there was something wrong or something broken about the law of God. Far from it. Jesus said, I didn't come to do away with the law. He didn't even come to fix the law. He didn't come to do away with it. He didn't come to fix it. Why? Because he didn't need to. The law of God is perfect. It doesn't need fixing. The law of God has always been perfect. The law of God will always be perfect. The law of God is perfect because the God of the law is perfect. So whatever our attitude toward the law, and for many of us that's a problem. Here's another reason that we have difficulty. Because we have this sort of radical dispensational view of salvation. And by radical dispensational view, I'm not talking about just that theological construct, but here's what many Christians believe. Many Christians believe that the saints in the Old Testament were saved by keeping the law, but then after Christ, you're saved by faith. This is what many Christians believe. And therefore, it just makes sense that Jesus needed to come at some point so that we could get away from that old concept of being saved through the law and now have a new idea of being saved apart from the law. If you were here as we preached through the life of Abraham, you know that's nowhere near true. Also, if you were here as we preached through the life of Abraham, you know that we spent a great deal of our time in the book of Romans, where Paul in the book of Romans explains Abraham believed God and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. Why was Abraham righteous? Why was he saved? How was he saved? By faith. How were the saints in the Old Testament saved? By faith. But when you say that to people again, what's the first question that comes? Well, how can they have faith in Jesus if Jesus wasn't born yet? The answer, Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15. The proto-evangelion, the first proclamation of the gospel. God promised that the seed of the woman would come and crush the head of the serpent. It's the first promise of the gospel. It's the first proclamation of the gospel. What do Adam and Eve believe from that moment on? We've sinned, we're going to die, but there's a deliverer who's going to come. Those 10 generations that we see in Genesis chapter 5, from Adam to Noah, through the line of Seth, what do we see? The promised seed is on the way. He's coming. Noah's daddy names him Noah because he believes that a deliverer is going to come. Where does he get the concept from? He got the concept from Adam. The promise that was made in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15. That's where he got it from. Abraham gets a promise from God. The promise is about what? The promised seed. Isaac then comes. Is he the ultimate promised seed? No, he's not the ultimate promised seed. Then God's going to make a point. Isaac's two boys are going to be twins. What are we going to do? Rebecca, shall we flip a coin? No, God's going to work it out. The older is going to serve the younger. In other words, it's Jacob, not Esau, who's the promised seed. That's fine. Well, then what happens? Then we come later on and we see this picture of Jacob. And we see these 12 sons of Jacob. And all of a sudden we see this picture in Jacob's life. And when we see this picture in Jacob's life, what do we look at? We see Jacob is in love with one daughter, but gets the other one instead. And we see this love story, and we interpret this love story, and we think the continuation of the seed is going to come through the one that he really loves. Nope. The continuation of the seed was through the wife he didn't even want. Judah was born to Leah, not Rachel. And Jesus Christ is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, not Joseph. We come all the way to David. David's always going to have a descendant of his on the throne. How's that going to happen? One of David's boys? It all points forward to Jesus. So in other words, Jesus is not plan B. Jesus is the fulfillment of plan only. Amen? I've said it before, I'll say it again. God is not running for God. He's God. He needs no contingency plans. He's God. This is God's plan. So look here again. This is also key. If you do any research on this verse, you're going to see a lot of work on this verb pleruo. And what do we mean here by fulfill? And some look at this and say, do not think that I've come to abolish the law of the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. As though Jesus is saying, in my life, I need to fulfill the law. That's not the point he's making in that verb. This is an eschatological statement. Jesus says the law and the prophets were pointing to me. That's what he's saying. I'm the fulfillment of these things. The law is perfect. The law doesn't need my help. The law is perfect. And it perfectly anticipated me. It perfectly pointed to me. So the first thing we need to understand, if we're going to understand God's law in light of the kingdom, is that the law is perfect. There is nothing wrong with the law. Listen to what John Calvin said. Christ, therefore, now declares that his doctrine is so far from being at variance with the law, that it agrees perfectly with the law and the prophets, and not only so, but brings the complete fulfillment of them. Jesus is saying here, I'm not at odds with the law. And the law is not at odds with me. There's nothing wrong with the law. The law is perfect. That's hard for us to hear because that's not what we get in modern American evangelicalism. Law, bad. Grace, good. The law is perfect. The law is wonderful. Listen to what Mounce says about this same idea. To the pious Jew, the law was perfect and unchangeable. Jesus' life and teaching appeared to many to indicate a lower view of the law. He healed on the Sabbath, failed to perform ritual duties, and was lax in observing religious feasts. It was necessary, therefore, for Jesus to point out at the beginning of his sermon the relationship of his teaching to the law. Because of what he's about to do. And again, Sermon on the Mount, his teaching, comes before what he's doing. He's laying a foundation for everything that he's about to do. And what he's saying is, when you see what I'm about to do, it may look like I have a problem with the law. Newsflash, the law is perfect. I don't have a problem with the law. The law doesn't have a problem with me. The one with the problem is you. You think you understand the law, but you have none whatsoever. So the law is perfect. Secondly, not only is the law perfect, but the law is also timeless. Look at verse 18. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot. Again, the smallest letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Not the smallest stroke. Not a breath mark. Will pass from the law until all is accomplished. The law is timeless. So again, the idea that there was this time or this period where we needed the law, now all of a sudden there's this time or this period when we don't need the law. Not only is that incorrect, but it's a direct contradiction of the teaching of Jesus himself. Jesus says the law is timeless. So there's not this hard and fast break that happens when Jesus comes on the scene. There's not a sense in which the law was wonderful and it was great up to a point, and now all of a sudden Jesus is on the scene, so we can just throw that away. It's not necessary anymore. It's no good anymore. It's outdated now. We need something different. We need something new. Nothing could be further from the truth. The law is timeless. Jesus presents himself as the eschatological fulfillment, not a replacement of the law. And again, this is difficult for us. Why? Because we've heard it over and over again, and we've said it over and over again. In fact, one of the words that we like to throw around is legalism. We have no idea what the word legalism actually means. You know what legalism means to the average American Christian? Legalism means you pay more attention to the law than I do. That's what legalism means. You know what legalism means doctrinally? Let me just give you here this brief definition. It's actually a long definition from Bill Baldwin. We won't read all of these points, but I'll just read a few of these. What legalism really is. Number one, using the Mosaic covenant as though it is a covenant between you and God. Using the Mosaic covenant as though is it a covenant between you and God. Okay, God, here's the Mosaic covenant. I'm going to keep it so that I can be blessed because I keep the Mosaic covenant because it's a covenant between me and you. Number two, attempting to be justified by one's own work. Attempting to be justified by one's own work. That's what legalism means. You're actually trying to be justified and think that you're going to get into heaven by what you do. Number three, attempting to be sanctified by one's own work. You actually think that you're going to become a better Christian because of your own effort. Number four, suggesting that our worth or worthiness, our self-esteem and self-satisfaction or lack thereof rest on our own works. Number five, any attempt to please God judicially or any supposition that our sin as believers has resulted in His judicial displeasure. Again, His judicial displeasure. We're talking about justification there. That's what legalism is. Legalism has to do with our not understanding justification. Legalism has to do with our trying to please God because we keep the law. Legalism has to do with us trying in and of ourselves to satisfy the righteous requirements of God. Legalism is that works righteousness that we've been talking about. That's what legalism is. Not delighting in the law of the Lord. No. We should delight in the law of the Lord. It's timeless. Listen to what MacArthur says on this point. So the moral standard set by the law does not change under grace. Indeed, it could not. It is a reflection of God's character. But divine grace actually empowers us to fulfill the moral demands of the law in a way that the law alone could never do. The only way that the law could change is if God changed. God gives us the law as a picture of what holiness and righteousness looks like. The only way for the law to change is if God changes his mind about what's holy and what's righteous. So God would have to say, you know what? I gave it a real good go back there in the Old Testament, but I think me and my son Jesus, we can do better. No, the law is timeless. Thirdly, God's law is relevant and applicable. Right here, right now, in our lives today. God's law is relevant and applicable. Look with me, if you will, at the next verse. Look at verse 19. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Here's what's ironic. Here's what we've said. You want to be a really good Christian? Stay on the right side of the Bible. Stay away from the law, because that law stuff, that's antithetical to Christianity. Jesus says, you want to uphold a kingdom ethic? Obey the law. Teach the law. Sounds ironic, doesn't it? Almost sounds out of place. Really makes us uncomfortable. But why? Why? Because of our misunderstanding of this phrase. Listen to the London Baptist Confession, our church's confession of faith, and its statement on the law of God and how relevant and applicable the law is, even right here and right now. This is number 6 in that chapter on the law. Although true believers are not under the law. That's true. We're not under the law. We're going to explain that in a minute. As a covenant of works, to be thereby justified or condemned. Yet it is of great use to them as well as to others, in that, first, as a rule of life, informing them of the will of God and their duty, it directs and binds them to walk accordingly. Secondly, it says it restrains their corruptions. And thirdly, it shows them God's approbation or of obedience and what blessings they may expect upon the performance thereof. In other words, the law is a good thing for believers. Why? Because if the law of God is perfect and you want to be holy as He is holy, you got to have a standard. Where do you get a standard? The law of God. The law of God. You want to have the right attitude toward your own sin? And not just become antinomian and lackadaisical and live any way you want to live? What do? Do you erect some standard from somewhere else? Do we just sort of put our heads together here and come up with some rules that we think would be really good for us to follow? Or do we go to the law of God? It's God's law. It is relevant. It is applicable. But finally, let's relieve some of the discomfort, shall we? God's law is insufficient for justification. It's insufficient for justification. You're not going to be saved by it. Look at verse 20. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven.